It was only a matter of time before the Microsoft Exchange attack led to a ransomware attack.
So, Chris, we've been hearing about the vulnerabilities in Microsoft Exchange for the last week or two, but I understand some attackers are now using it to spread ransomware?
Yes, that's correct. So a lot of these attackers are taking advantage of the ProxyLogon exploit that was released earlier this month. And if there's a couple CVEs out there on it, and one of them is a server-side request forgery, that the attackers are able to authenticate into the Microsoft Exchange servers and launch a DearCry ransomware payload into it. So it's also known as DojoCat, and it's a human-operated attack on the Microsoft Exchange servers. And if I can have one positive note on it, some antivirus systems are starting to detect it, but there are still about over 80,000 old servers that are still vulnerable. So there's still and people from Palo Alto have said that if you have an old server, expect it to be compromised when applying the patch. That's unfortunately the bad side of it. But I know in Ganesh's in our last segment, they're using kind of a rare XOR encryption algorithm. The adversaries in this one are using a pretty common one. They're actually encrypting with AES 256, and then they're encrypting that key with an RSA public key. So, and if somehow someone can, I guess, steal the private key from the adversaries, they might be able to decrypt it. And it's a big if, because you got to get their private key, but to decrypt the RSA and then to decrypt to get the AES, and then they can use AES to decrypt all their files. But that's a big if, because you're pretty dependent on that private key. Yes, so they do encrypt. With using the encryption algorithm, they are encrypting every file with .crypt, and they are leaving a README text where it's like, if you want your files decrypted, you can contact me at these 2 email addresses. And pretty standard ransomware attack where it's, I want to encrypt your files and then pay me and I'll decrypt all your files for you.
Just a quick clarification from Chris. I think in the article it mentioned like they were asking $16,000. Is it Bitcoin? Do they have any cryptocurrency involved? Or is it just they gave the contact information for the next steps? I mean, typically we have seen they provide some sort of Bitcoin or Monero miner, something like that.
Yeah, they didn't specify in that article, but I would say most likely, because it's harder to track Bitcoin than just a regular payment. So I wouldn't be surprised if some cryptocurrency was involved too.
When we first found out about these, Exchange vulnerabilities, my first thought was, yeah, Exchange is used for email, but in general, I've always been nervous about putting them internet facing. I always prefer to have some sort of a proxy MX server sitting in front of it, a sendmail or a postfix or something, just because we've had so many issues over the years with people brute forcing OWA on Exchange servers, which the web interface to Outlook is what that is for those who aren't familiar with it. And so I've always been nervous about those being directly internet facing anyway. But then, with this particular set of vulnerabilities, I guess I shouldn't be surprised that it went so quickly from, nation state type actors down to the criminals who are, using it for ransomware. Once the proof of concepts were out there last week, it was really it was a pretty short step once the proof of concept was out there for the criminals to start taking advantage of this for.
I'm also curious if it was a mistake to release kind of the remote execution vulnerability beforehand, because the article doesn't really go into it. If they knew, if they found out about the ProxyLogon vulnerability that they used to transport the payload ahead of time, or if they found out because that was released publicly.
My guess from the timing is that it was reverse engineered from the proof of concept. I could be wrong about that. Maybe somebody really was using this ahead of time, but given the timing that that folks were starting to see the ransomware appearing on March 9th, and the patch was out on the 8th, it sounds to me like they quickly reverse engineered it, but I could be wrong.
So in the scenario, I mean, again, it goes to the point, because since it's a ransomware, it's always good to have good verified offline backups. And also, I think, I guess the moral is to patch it as soon as possible and don't wait any longer.
Yeah, absolutely. Patch when you can, and limit what is internet facing. I mean, I hate to keep beating a dead horse, and I'm going to do it again in my story, but limit what is internet facing. Only expose to the internet what absolutely needs to be exposed to the internet.
So thanks, Chris. I think this is really interesting. It's like a typical ransomware, but as Jim pointed out, the speed at which actually they leverage the zero days into potential, ransomware. That's most worrying part. Typically, there sometimes they make it into one kind of thing, then maybe they leverage it to turn it into something else. But in this scenario, they just super fasted into turning into ransomware as quickly as possible.